This is the back hatch of the Volt with the factory cover removed. That kind of builds the false floor for the back hatch area. You can see in the middle the factory subwoofer. My car has Dynamat in the back. I did that initially when I got the car just to reduce some road noise. These are the 3 plugs that come off the factory wiring harness back to the Bose amplifier. They're labeled in the GM wiring schematic as the X1, X2, and X3 connectors. Here I'd taken out the factory subwoofer and I was just measuring to see how big of a amplifier board I would need to build. So I just measured the length and the width so that I could build a board with brackets on it to screw down to the place where the factory subwoofer screwed down to the floor. There are just some little bolt posts that are welded into the floor that come out that you can use to screw an amplifier board down. This was the amplifier board that I built. I just cut a thin piece of MDF and used some metal brackets. I screwed them to the MDF and then used some liquid nails to secure them once I kind of had an idea of how they would have to line up for those posts that come out of the floor. This is with the amplifier board installed in the back of the car. The arrows pointing to the X1, X2, and X3 connectors that come off the factory wiring harness. This was when I started building out the X3 harness. For this I used the Access OESWCLAN29H steering wheel control wiring harness. You're basically just only using one connector out of this harness and you're discarding the rest of them. It was the only harness that I found that had the right plug in it for the X3 connector. It does work fine and it has all the wires. This is the completed X3 harness. I ended up actually using L-angle RCA plugs for this. I didn't use the ones that are in the picture. The reason for that is I realized when you put the false floor back down in, it doesn't quite clear the longer connectors. So I just opted for some L ones. You could probably get away with using some like shorter ones. Just ones that are as long as the ones in the picture aren't quite gonna fit. The next thing I did was I started installing the front door speakers. This is the passenger side door panel removed. Kind of give you an idea of what you'll see if you take the door panel off. I would probably recommend covering the 2 holes that are visible with some Dynamat and putting some Dynamat in the back of the door. Definitely not a very big door to produce much bass, so if you don't add the Dynamat, you're probably not going to get a lot of bass out of your front mid-woofer speakers. This is the Metra 72-5600 speaker adapter plug for the front door speakers. This is actually a Ford labeled plug, but it fits right in the GM connectors. I was kind of surprised, but it seems to work fine. Here's the front door speaker installed. I ended up using the Morel Maximo Ultra 602s. These weren't the first speakers that I picked. I had some focals previously, and that's what you'll see in the next clips with the tweeters. But the Morels ended up being the ones that I stuck with because they had a cleaner sound and they sounded better for a lot more types of music than the focals. I ended up using some Dynamat behind them, and then I used some quick rings to just kind of seal them up against the door panel when I put it back on. This is the front pillar after I removed it to install the tweeter. There's just one screw holding this in. It's at the top under the airbag panel. You just pop it out and then you can unscrew it and the whole pillar will come out. This is just a closer shot of the tweeter installed in the pillar. The factory tweeters are plastic welded into the pillar, so you do have to break those to get it out. If you were going to reinstall the factory tweeter, you would probably have to glue them back in. I just used hot glue to secure the tweeter, and it hasn't caused any issues. I've taken them out a couple times and the glue wasn't melting from heat, so I think that this is a fine solution. This is the subwoofer I decided to use for the build. I went with this subwoofer because I didn't want to have a bigger subwoofer in the back hatch area. This was the only subwoofer I could find that dimensionally fit in the only spot that was available under the front driver's seat. As you can see, the subwoofer fits under the front driver's seat pretty well. It does produce a decent amount of bass, but it's nothing car shaking. I wasn't really going for a ton of bass in this build, but if you wanted to use a bigger subwoofer, you could easily just run the wires for it into the back hatch area instead of up under the front driver's seat and install any subwoofer you wanted. This is what it looks like between the rear seats with the center console removed. The first arrow is pointing to about where the wire is that you have to tap into so that you can get your 12 volts power with the key. The other arrow is pointing to where I grounded the subwoofer. This is the completed amp board. I'll stay on this clip for a while and I'll go over a couple of things in the picture. I'll also leave this picture in the description so you can just download it for reference. So at the bottom you can see that I used a fuse. This just came with a wiring kit that I bought. The battery's right there behind everything, so it's just a really short run to it, and there is an open spot on the battery terminal you can just screw the wire to. You can see the mini DSP in there and the Alpine amp that I picked. That was really the only amplifier that I could pick that was not one of the kind of small amplifiers that has the wires already coming out of it. That's the Alpine MVR F300. So you can see the X1, X2, and X3 connectors there. The X1 and X2 have most of the speaker outputs in them, so that's what you hook up to the amplifier to go out to the various speakers in the car, and then the X3 providing the line level into the mini DSP. And then you can see the RCAs going out to the amplifier and to the subwoofer out of the output side of the mini DSP. The mini DSP needs to be powered, so I used the power that was coming out of the X2 connector to power the mini DSP. I ended up using the factory Morel crossovers, so the mini DSP will provide an active crossover, and you could just hook up the tweeters and the mid-bass speakers in the front doors to the amplifier and use all 4 channels of it for your fronts and run active crossovers for the tweeters and the mid speakers, but I decided that I wanted the rear speakers to be powered, so I'm just using channel 1 and 2 of the Alpine for the fronts and using the passive crossovers, and then using 3 and 4 for the door speakers. After I took this picture, I ended up going in and doing a little bit more tidying up. You can see in the picture I used some of the plastic wire shielding to kind of hide the various wires. After that, I actually found the tape that GM uses that's on the factory wiring connectors, and I taped everything up with that. It's kind of like a cloth tape that most car wiring harnesses use. I'll leave a link to that in the description as well.